Have you ever met someone who changed everything inside you with just a smile? What if one day you confessed the deepest pain you carry? I can't have children, and the man standing before you simply smiled and said, "Good. I've got enough kids for both of us." Would you stay or would you walk away, afraid that love like that couldn't possibly be meant for you? This is the story of Evelyn, a woman who once lost her faith in herself, and Caleb, a quiet cowboy raising 3 orphans under the vast Montana sky. They meet not in perfection, but in the middle of loneliness, 2 broken souls standing at the edge of something neither dared to believe in. Between them lies a choice to keep hiding behind their scars, or to risk everything for a family that defies the rules of blood and name. If it were you, could you open your heart again, knowing what you've lost? Could you trust love when it comes from someone who's been hurt too? Could you believe that sometimes family isn't something you're born into? It's something you build, one act of kindness at a time. This is a story of courage, redemption, and the kind of love that stays. A story that will make you remember what it feels like to be seen, to be wanted, and to finally belong. If you believe in love that heals, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the journey of Evelyn and Caleb is just beginning. The woman stood at the edge of the wide valley, where the wind smelled of sage and sun-baked soil. Her name was Evelyn Shaw, though most folks just called her Eve. The hem of her travel dress was coated in dust, and her hands trembled slightly as she fixed the pins on her hat. Beyond the gate, the land stretched for miles, dry fences, scattered barns, and a sky so big it seemed to swallow sound itself. She whispered to the silence, as if practicing words that never came easy. "I can't have children," she said, her voice barely louder than the wind. From the porch of the old ranch house, a tall figure looked up. Caleb Ryder. He was built like the land itself, broad-shouldered, weather-scarred, with calm gray eyes that had seen too many storms to be easily moved. The setting sun caught the line of his jaw, turning it to bronze. Eve lifted her chin and took a breath. "Mr. Ryder," she called, steady as she could. "I was told you might be needing a teacher." Caleb leaned one shoulder against the post, studying her for a long moment. "You ride all the way from Clearwater 20 miles, she said. "Your foreman wrote the notice at the mercantile. Said you had young ones here." A pause stretched between them, filled with the hum of crickets and the distant creak of a windmill. "Finally." Caleb's mouth curved half a smile, half a question. "You ever had any of your own?" The words hit her chest like the crack of a dry branch. She met his gaze, refused to look away. "I cannot," she answered softly, "but I can teach them as if they were mine." Caleb's eyes didn't soften, but something behind them shifted. He gave a small nod. "Good," he said. "I've got enough kids for both." He pushed the gate open with a quiet scrape of iron, motioning her in. "Come on, then. Let's see if you last through supper." Inside the yard, 3 children watched from the corral. A boy of 10 with a serious face and skin the color of copper dust. Micah stood protectively before a smaller girl, Rosie, all freckles and tangled hair. The youngest, Tala, sat in the dirt with a wooden horse missing one leg. Their eyes tracked Eve's every step, curious but cautious, like colts who hadn't decided if the hand reaching out meant sugar or rope. Caleb's voice carried easily. "Kids, this here's Miss Shaw. She's going to teach you letters, if you don't scare her off first." Rosie grinned, missing a front tooth. Micah gave a curt nod. Tala hid behind his sleeve. Eve smiled, lowering herself to their level, "Then we'll make a deal," she said. "You teach me your names proper, and I'll teach you how to spell them." It earned her the first laugh of the evening, a quick, surprised sound that vanished into the wind but left warmth behind. The ranch smelled of hay, smoke, and old pine. Inside, the walls bore marks of years' tiny scratches where chairs had scraped, faint soot from winters too long. Everything spoke of work done with quiet hands and little complaint. Supper was simple cornbread, beans, and milk so fresh it still held the chill of the barn. The children ate fast, sneaking glances at Eve. Caleb sat at the head of the table, silent except for the clink of a spoon. When she thanked him for the meal, he only nodded once. But when Rosie spilled her cup and froze in terror, Eve reached calmly for a rag, cleaned the mess, and said, "If a little milk's the worst thing we lose today, I'd call it a blessing." The girl blinked, then giggled. Caleb looked up from his plate. For the first time, he smiled without hiding it. Later, Eve stepped outside. Dusk was settling, painting the valley in shades of violet and gold. Somewhere, an owl called. She wrapped her shawl tighter, feeling the chill that came after sunset. Behind her, the soft sound of boots approached. Caleb stopped beside her, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You ride well," he said at last. "I used to ride with my husband," she answered quietly. "He passed. Fire in the camp hospital 2 winters ago." Caleb didn't offer pity, just a slow nod. "Loss carves deep," he murmured. "But it don't always break you." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain far off in the mountains. Eve looked toward it, then back at the house where 3 small shadows played behind thin curtains. "I didn't come here looking for anything grand," she said. "Just somewhere I can be useful again." Caleb's voice was low, steady. "Then you came to the right place." That night, in the small room near the kitchen, Eve unpacked her few belongings: a worn Bible, a notebook, a tiny locket with no picture inside. Through the thin wall, she heard laughter reel, unguarded laughter, and for the first time in years. Her heart ached not from grief, but from hope. She blew out the lamp, whispering into the dark, "Maybe this is where the healing starts." Outside, the wind moved softly through the sage, carrying her words toward the sleeping valley. The first mornings at Sage Hollow began before the sun. The air carried that sharp Montana chill, the kind that bit at the skin even in midsummer. Evelyn Shaw rose early, her breath fogging as she lit the stove and filled the kettle. She wasn't told to. No one had said a word about chores, but it felt right to do something useful in a house that still felt borrowed. When the children appeared one by one, rubbing their eyes, she greeted them softly. Micah, the oldest, already had that quiet weight of responsibility. He moved with the caution of someone who'd learned long ago that mistakes cost. Rosie followed, her hair a tumble of curls, humming under her breath. Little Tala trailed behind them, clutching a blanket like a shield. Caleb came in last, boots heavy with dew, hat shadowing his face. "Coffee's strong," he said, nodding toward the kettle. "That's a good start." Evelyn didn't answer, just smiled faintly. The silence between them wasn't cold, it was simply how he spoke. Words, to Caleb Ryder, seemed to be a luxury saved for when they truly mattered. After breakfast, the children scattered to their chores. Evelyn followed them outside, notebook in hand. The ranch stretched endlessly, a sea of waving grass and split-rail fences, dotted with cattle moving slow as clouds. The world here had a rhythm of its own. She wrote letters in the dirt with a stick A for apple, B for barn, and watched as Rosie tried to mimic her. Micah pretended not to care. But after a while, he began correcting her crooked lines. When Caleb passed by with a saddle over his shoulder, he stopped just long enough to look. "That dirt's going to be letters soon," he said, and kept walking. By noon, the sun burned high and fierce. They gathered under the porch to escape it. Evelyn handed the children slices of cold cornbread wrapped in cloth. Micah ate in silence. Rosie chattered about the shapes of clouds. Tala leaned against Evelyn's arm, small fingers tracing the buttons on her sleeve. "You got soft hands," the little girl said. Evelyn smiled. "Used to be rough once. Guess I've been healing. Same as you." Caleb's shadow crossed the porch, pausing by the doorway. "Kids seem to listen better when you talk soft," he said. "Maybe they've had enough shouting in their lives," Evelyn replied gently. For the first time, he didn't turn away. His eyes met hers, calm and searching. "You might be right." That evening, a wind picked up from the mountains, carrying the smell of rain and pine. The sky darkened, the kind of deep blue that promised thunder. Evelyn helped the children gather toys and books before the storm broke. Caleb worked outside, securing the horses, shouting brief instructions against the wind. When he finally came inside, soaked to the bone, the room filled with the warmth of the stove and the sound of laughter. Rosie had convinced Tala to dance with her, their bare feet thudding lightly on the wood floor. Micah sat pretending to read, though his eyes followed the girls with quiet amusement. Evelyn stood by the window, watching lightning split the far hills. Caleb glanced her way. "Storms come fast here," he said, removing his hat. "But they pass quick, too." "Like grief," she murmured. He looked up sharply, as if he hadn't expected her to say it aloud. Then he nodded once. "Yeah, like grief." When the thunder rolled closer, Tala whimpered. Evelyn knelt, pulling the child close. "It's just the sky talking loud," she whispered, stroking her hair. "It can't hurt you in here." Micah reached over and placed his small hand on Tala's back. Rosie wrapped them both in her arms. Caleb watched the scene silently, his expression unreadable. For years he had faced the land's harshness without flinching drought, fire, loneliness, but the sight of this small circle of comfort brought something unfamiliar to his throat. After the storm passed, the air smelled clean, like the world had been washed. The moon rose pale and full over the valley. Evelyn stepped outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Caleb followed, leaning on the rail beside her. "You handle storms better than most," he said quietly. She smiled, not looking at him. "I've had my share, lost people, lost a piece of myself along the way." Caleb's voice lowered. "You still think about him." "Your husband every day," she said, "but not the way I used to. Back then it was fire and smoke and guilt. Now it's more like a prayer, something I carry so I don't forget where I came from." Caleb nodded. "That's fair." He hesitated, then added, "World doesn't hand out second chances easy." "Maybe not," she replied, eyes on the horizon. "But sometimes it gives you people who do." They stood there a long time, saying nothing. The wind rustled the grass like quiet applause. Later, when Evelyn went to check on the children, she found Tala half awake, whispering to the stuffed horse she carried everywhere. The child's voice was soft, trembling with dream. "Don't go, Mama," she murmured. Evelyn froze. The word Mama hit her like a chord struck deep inside. She knelt, brushed a curl from the child's face, and whispered, "I'm here, sweetheart." I'm not going anywhere. Tala sighed, slipped back into sleep. Evelyn sat there for a long time, listening to the steady rhythm of small breaths. From the doorway, Caleb's voice came low. She don't usually call anyone that. Evelyn turned, startled. He stood there barefoot, shirt sleeves rolled up, looking almost uncertain. She misses someone, Evelyn said quietly. So do we all, Caleb answered. He stepped forward, his hand brushing the doorframe. You're doing fine here, Miss Shaw. Better than fine. She wanted to thank him, but her voice failed. Instead, she just nodded. He lingered a moment longer, then walked away, his boots soft on the wooden floor. Outside, the rain started again light this time, like a whisper against the roof. Evelyn leaned her head against the wall, eyes closed. The ache in her chest wasn't pain anymore. It was something gentler, something that felt like belonging, trying to find its place. That night, the ranch slept easy, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Evelyn dreamed not of fire or loss, but of laughter faint and far away, rising over the fields of Sage Hollow. The morning light came soft through the thin curtains, painting the room in a gentle gold. Evelyn woke to the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen and the smell of coffee brewing. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. Then she heard Rosie's laughter from outside, and memory came back like a tide. Sage Hollow, the children, Caleb. The days had begun to fall into a rhythm steady, reliable, like the slow heartbeat of the land itself. Yet beneath that calm, Evelyn carried a weight no one saw. Every smile she gave had a shadow behind it, and every night, before sleep, she would press her hand against her lower stomach and whisper a silent apology to a life she could never carry. That morning, Caleb found her on the porch after breakfast, mending a torn sleeve from Micah's shirt. The air was crisp, the kind that made the coffee steam hang in the sunlight. He stood there for a while before speaking, his voice low and measured. You sew better than most women I've seen out here. Evelyn smiled faintly. Years of patching up soldiers made the hands steady, fabrics easier than flesh. He nodded, looking toward the corral where the children were chasing a stray chicken. You were a nurse, then field nurse, she said. During the big fever outbreak 3 winters ago, my husband and I worked the same post. She paused, fingers stilling on the fabric. The memory rose like smoke heat, panic, the screams through canvas tents. There was a fire. Started in the supply tent. We were short on water, short on everything. He went back inside to pull out a child. The tent fell before he made it out. Caleb's jaw tightened, his eyes on the horizon. You tried to follow him. I did. Her voice wavered. The roof caught me across the hip. They said I was lucky to live. But after that... She looked down at her lap, at the needle trembling between her fingers. There were no more chances. Caleb didn't move closer, but his silence was different this time. Less like distance, more like listening. You don't owe anyone an explanation. Miss Shaw, he said quietly. Maybe not, she whispered, but it feels better to speak it out loud sometimes. Makes the ghosts settle. The door creaked behind them. Micah stood there, awkward, a bundle of books in his arms. Miss Eve, Rosie and me finished chores. Can we read now? Evelyn smiled at the boy's serious face. Of course. Bring them here. For the next hour. She listened to Micah sound out the words from an old Bible, his brow furrowed in concentration. Rosie corrected him with exaggerated patience. Caleb stayed nearby, fixing a bridle, but listening all the same. When Micah finally read a full sentence without stumbling, Evelyn clapped softly. The boy's grin flashed quick and shy. "You've got a good teacher's touch," Caleb said later. When the children ran off to fetch water, "Teaching's easy when you care about who you're teaching," she replied. That afternoon, the sky grew overcast. A wind came down from the ridge, cold and restless. Caleb had gone into Clearwater for supplies, leaving Evelyn to mind the house. She took the chance to wash linens in the creek, her skirts tucked up, the water numbing her hands. The sound of the stream was soothing until she saw a rider far down the trail. A man, broad-shouldered, in a brown coat and hat she did not recognize. He slowed near the fence line, staring at the ranch with an expression she couldn't place. Suspicion, regret. Then he turned his horse and rode away. That night, when Caleb returned, she mentioned it casually over dinner. "Someone rode by today. Didn't stop. Looked like he was watching." Caleb's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Tall man, dark coat." "Yes." He set the fork down. "Burke. Old rancher from the next valley. Used to work with the agency folks in town. Don't worry yourself none. But if he comes back, you tell me." There was something in his tone tight, careful. Evelyn let the matter drop, but the unease lingered. Later, she found herself on the porch again. The stars were sharp and bright, scattered like spilled salt. Caleb joined her, a lantern flickering in his hand. "You think that man's trouble?" she asked. He took a long breath. "Out here, folks don't always see the same way we do. I took in those kids when no one else would. Rosie's ma was a drifter. Micah and Taylor come from places most people don't care to mention. Burke thinks I'm breaking rules. Says blood should stay with blood." Evelyn turned to look at him. "But he's wrong." Caleb's gaze met hers, steady and fierce. "I don't give a damn about blood. What matters is who stays when it's hard." She felt something inside her shift, an understanding deeper than words. The loneliness she'd carried for so long began to loosen its hold. "That's what makes a family," she said softly. "Maybe that's why you fit here," he murmured. The lantern light caught the edge of his face, the quiet strength in it. For a heartbeat, the distance between them felt smaller than ever. Evelyn looked away, her voice barely a whisper. "You think a person like me can belong again?" Caleb's reply came slow, deliberate. "I think you already do." The wind lifted her hair, carrying the faint scent of sage. In the stillness, she realized she hadn't felt this kind of peace in years. Fragile, fleeting, but real. Later, when she went to check the sleeping children, she paused by Tala's bed. The little girl clutched the wooden horse again, its missing leg wrapped in string. Evelyn touched her cheek lightly. "Good night, sweetheart," she murmured. The child stirred, mumbling a word that caught in Evelyn's chest. "Mama." It wasn't the first time she'd heard it, but tonight it didn't ache. It warmed her instead. She whispered back, "Sleep well, my little one." Outside, the coyotes called across the valley. Caleb was still awake, sitting by the dying fire, hat tilted low over his eyes. When Evelyn passed, he lifted it slightly, offering a quiet nod. No words were needed. They had both shared enough for one night. And in that shared silence, something unspoken began to grow, a fragile trust, the kind that only forms between two people who know loss too well and choose, despite it, to keep reaching toward the light. The next few days brought a quiet kind of peace to Sage Hollow. The sun stretched longer, the grass turned brittle at the edges, and the air began to taste of dust and change. Evelyn found herself humming again, small, tuneless melodies she hadn't realized she remembered. The children had taken to following her around, half curious, half attached. When she hung the laundry, Rosie handed her clothespins. When she mended shirts, Tala curled at her feet. Micah even started asking about stories from the old world, the one she'd lived before the ranch. Caleb noticed, though he said little. He'd watch from the barn door sometimes, arms crossed, face unreadable. There was something about seeing his home full of sound again that softened him, even if he didn't admit it aloud. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the valley in copper light, the sound of hooves echoed from the road. A rider approached a man in a gray coat with a leather satchel tied to his saddle. The moment Evelyn saw him, her stomach tightened. Riders rarely came uninvited. Caleb met him at the gate, and they exchanged a few quiet words. Then the man handed him a sealed envelope and turned his horse back toward the ridge without another word. Evelyn watched from the porch as Caleb stared at the letter a long time before walking toward her. From town, she asked softly. He nodded, his expression clouded. County office. She waited as he tore it open, eyes scanning the page. The lines around his mouth deepened. They're sending an inspector. Says there's been a complaint. Claims I'm keeping children not of my blood without lawful guardianship. Her hands tightened around the fabric she'd been folding. That man you mentioned, Burke. Caleb gave a short nod. He's been stirring things in town. Thinks a man like me has no right raising strays. That's not what they are, she said fiercely. They're family. I know it, he replied, voice low, steady and tired. But the law don't care what we call love. Inside. Rosie peeked from the doorway, wide-eyed. Pa, are they gonna take us? Caleb turned, instantly softening his tone. Ain't nobody taking you anywhere, darlin'. The lie came gentle, but Evelyn saw the truth flicker in his eyes. That night, after the children were asleep, she found him sitting on the porch, staring into the distance. The sky was full of stars, sharp and endless. She brought him a mug of coffee, still warm, and sat beside him. They can't just come and take them, she said quietly. They can, he answered, voice rough. And they will, if I don't find a way to fight it. Evelyn set her cup down. Then we'll fight. Caleb looked at her, surprise flickering through the weariness. You say that like you fought the law before. I fought worse, she said. Disease. Fire. Losing everything and having to wake up the next day anyway. She turned to him, meeting his gaze. You gave those children a home when the world didn't care if they lived or died. If they want proof of a family, they'll have it. How we'll show them what family looks like. He didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth twitched the closest thing to a smile he could manage under the weight he carried. The next morning, Evelyn saddled one of the gentler horses and rode to Clearwater. The ride was long, nearly 12 miles across the dry plain, but she didn't stop. When she reached the small town, she went straight to the church. Reverend Harlan was there, polishing the old pews. Miss Shaw, he greeted kindly. What brings you this far? She explained everything the children, the letter, the threat. The Reverend listened, eyes narrowing as the story unfolded. When she finished, he nodded. You tell Mr. Ryder I'll vouch for his care, and so will half this town, if they've got sense. Evelyn left the church with her heart steadier. She spent the rest of the day speaking to people, shopkeepers, ranch hands, mothers whose children had learned to read from her lessons under the oak tree. Each promised to write a statement, to tell the county that Caleb Ryder's ranch was no place of neglect, but of quiet, honest love. By the time she returned home, the stars were already up. Caleb was waiting at the fence line. "You rode all the way to town?" he asked. "I did," she said, breathless, covered in dust, "and I got us some allies." He studied her for a moment, something unspoken moving behind his eyes. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," she replied, "because this is my fight now, too." Caleb stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "You're not from here. Evelyn, you could have turned around, gone back east, started over." "I already started over," she said softly. "Right here." The words hung between them, heavier than the silence that followed. Inside the house, the children had stayed awake, waiting. Tala ran to Evelyn first, wrapping her arms around her waist. Rosie followed, then Micah, who stood back but couldn't hide the relief on his face. "Everything's all right now?" Rosie asked. "Not yet," Evelyn said gently, kneeling so she could meet their eyes. "But it will be. We're not giving up." When the children finally went to bed, Caleb stood in the doorway, watching her tuck the blankets around them. "They trust you," he said quietly. "They trust you too," she answered. "They just needed someone to remind them what home feels like." He nodded once, as if he couldn't argue with that. Later, when the house had gone still, Evelyn sat by the fire, writing letters of her own, one to the county, one to the governor's clerk in Helena, one to a friend she'd known in the nurse corps who owed her a favor. Each one was a plea written in calm, measured words, describing not a legal case, but a truth that love, work, and sacrifice made a family more than any law could decree. When she finished, her hand ached, but her spirit did not. She looked out the window at the dark silhouette of the barn where Caleb had bedded the horses for the night. For a long time, she just watched the lantern light move inside, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. And in that stillness, Evelyn realized something she hadn't dared admit even to herself. Somewhere along the quiet days and stormy nights, she had stopped being an outsider. She wasn't just visiting Sage Hollow anymore. She belonged to it. And it, through the laughter of its children, the strength of its keeper, the dust on its winds, belonged to her. The air changed before the rain came. By late afternoon, the sky turned a dull, bruised gray, and the horses grew restless in the paddock. Evelyn felt it too, something in the wind that pressed low against the earth, thick and uneasy. The children sensed it, clinging to her skirts as thunder rolled somewhere beyond the ridge. Caleb stood by the barn doors, squinting toward the west. "That storm's coming fast," he muttered. "You and the kids stay close inside. I'll tie the stock down before it breaks." "You shouldn't go out there alone," Evelyn said, raising her voice over the wind. He looked back at her, his hat already pulled low. "Won't be the first time I've ridden through worse." She wanted to argue, but the clouds were moving like a wall. He turned away before she could speak again, leading his horse out into the growing dark. Inside the house, Evelyn moved quickly, closing shutters, lighting lamps, and herding the children into the parlor. The walls creaked as the storm descended. Lightning flashed, splitting the sky into pale bones. Rain followed, hard and relentless. Rosie whimpered, pressing close to Micah. "Pa's still out there." "He'll be fine," Evelyn said, though her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. "He knows these storms." But an hour passed, then another. The rain didn't let up, and Caleb didn't return. Evelyn paced, her eyes darting to the window every few seconds. The world beyond was a blur of water and shadow. Tala began to cough, a small sound at first, but it grew sharper. Evelyn knelt beside her, touching the child's forehead. Hot, too hot. Panic shot through her chest. The girl's breaths came shallow. Quick. "Micah," Evelyn said, trying to steady her voice. "Fetch the blanket by the fire. Rosie, bring water." They obeyed without question. She wrapped Tala tight, her fingers trembling. "She's burning up," Rosie whispered. Evelyn nodded. "It's fever." The damp air made it worse. She forced calm into her tone, but her mind was racing. There were no doctors for miles, and the only medicine they had was a half-empty bottle of willow bark tincture. A sudden knock pounded on the door, loud enough to shake the hinges. Evelyn jumped, startled. When she opened it, rain rushed in, and with it, Caleb, soaked through and gasping for breath. "The bridge by the creek's gone," he said, water streaming down his coat. "Two of the horses spooked, broke their reins. I couldn't get." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Tala in her arms, limp and pale. "What happened?" "She's sick," Evelyn said quickly. Fever hit fast. Caleb knelt beside them, his hands clumsy but desperate. "She was fine this morning." "I know," Evelyn said softly. "It can turn like this with little ones. We need help. Caleb, if the fever doesn't break soon, I'll ride," he said instantly. Evelyn caught his arm. "The river's flooded. You'll drown before you reach clear water. I can't sit here while she burns." He snapped. "That doctor owes me. I'll find a way." She wanted to beg him to stay, but one look at his face told her she couldn't stop him. His love for that child, his stubborn, wordless devotion would carry him into hell if it meant a chance to save her. Evelyn stood, grabbed his coat, and tied the oilskin under his chin herself. "Then go," she whispered. "But come back. Please come back." He hesitated, eyes locked on hers. "You take care of him till I do." "I will." And then he was gone, swallowed by the storm. The hours that followed blurred together. Evelyn sat by Tala's side, sponging her forehead, whispering lullabies she hadn't sung in years. Micah stayed close, silent and tense, while Rosie tried to keep the fire alive. The sound of rain became everything: the roof's rhythm, the windows rattling, the thunder's angry breath. At one point, Tala stirred, her voice faint. Mama Evelyn brushed her hair back. "I'm here, sweetheart. You rest now." The fever raged on. The girl's small body trembled, her breath shallow and ragged. Evelyn pressed her palms together and prayed, words tumbling out without thought. "Lord, keep him safe. Bring him back. Let her stay." Sometime after midnight, the wind shifted. Hoofbeats echoed faintly outside. She rushed to the door, heart in her throat. Through the curtain of rain, two figures appeared, one on horseback, one slumped behind him. Caleb staggered through the gate, dragging another man down with him, the doctor from Clearwater, soaked but alive. "I got him," Caleb gasped. "And his kit." Evelyn grabbed his arm to steady him as he nearly collapsed from exhaustion. "Come inside." The doctor wasted no time. He knelt beside Tala, checked her pulse, and began his work with quiet precision. Evelyn fetched hot water, towels, and the last of the clean cloth. Caleb hovered, pale and shivering, unable to do anything but watch. Hours passed. Then, as dawn began to pale the windows, the fever broke. Tala slept at last, her tiny chest rising slow and steady. Evelyn sank to her knees beside her, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Caleb put a hand on her shoulder, his touch hesitant but sure. "She's gonna make it," he whispered. Evelyn nodded, too tired to speak. The doctor packed his bag and left before the sun climbed over the ridge. Caleb walked him out, then came back, dripping with cold morning air. He dropped into the chair beside the fire and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You shouldn't have gone out there," Evelyn said softly. "You could have died." He looked at her with a faint, weary smile. "Could have," he admitted. "But I reckon I'd do it again." She shook her head, half angry, half in awe. "You're impossible." He laughed quietly. "That's been said before." They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the rain ease into a gentle drizzle. In the cot nearby, Tala stirred but didn't wake. Rosie slept curled beside her sister, while Micah dozed by the hearth, his head resting on his arms. Evelyn turned to Caleb. "You risked everything for them." His eyes lifted to hers. "They're all I've got. And now—" He paused, the words catching. "Now, maybe I've got more." Her breath hitched. "You mean me?" He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said enough. Outside, the last drops of rain fell from the eaves, glimmering in the first light of morning. Inside, warmth returned to the house, slow and real. For the first time, Sage Hollow felt unbreakable. The morning after the storm, the world felt different. The air was clean, sweet with wet sage and pine, and the ground shimmered with puddles that caught the pale light of dawn. Inside the house, Evelyn moved quietly, careful not to wake the sleeping children. Tala was breathing steady now, her cheeks flushed with the color of life again. Every small rise and fall of her chest felt like a miracle. Caleb was still asleep in the chair beside the hearth, his hat tilted forward, boots muddy from the night's ordeal. For the first time since she'd arrived, Evelyn allowed herself a long look at him, the lines of exhaustion etched deep around his mouth, the roughness of his hands, the steadiness even in rest. She realized then that the man before her was not the cold cowboy she'd first met, but something entirely different, a soul built on quiet endurance. She stirred the fire, reheated the coffee, and watched the flame catch. When he finally woke, his voice was rough from sleep. "She's better." Evelyn nodded, smiling softly. "Fever broke before sunrise. The worst has passed." Caleb exhaled a sound that was almost a prayer. Thank God. He stood, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. "You didn't sleep." "I couldn't," she said. "Not until she did." Their eyes met across the firelight, both knowing what those words carried. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Caleb reached for his hat and set it down again, as though remembering he didn't need it right now. "You've done more for this place than anyone in a long while," he said quietly. "More than I could ask." Evelyn shook her head. "You didn't ask. I stayed because I wanted to." Before he could answer, a sound broke the calm, the crunch of wagon wheels on the damp road, the low murmur of men's voices. Caleb's posture changed instantly, the kind of stillness that came before danger. He moved to the window and looked out. A government wagon stood near the fence. Two men in long coats stepped down, hats low against the wind. One of them carried a leather folder tucked under his arm. The other, tall, with sharp eyes, wore a badge on his vest. Evelyn's stomach tightened. She didn't need Caleb to tell her who they were. "They're from the county," he said under his breath. "They came sooner than I thought." Micah appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes. "Pa, who's that stay upstairs?" Caleb said firmly. "And keep your sisters close." Evelyn's pulse quickened as she followed him to the door. "Let me talk to them." He looked at her, jaw set. "This is my fight. Eve, it's ours now," she said, her voice steady. "You don't have to stand alone anymore." The knock came sharp, official. Caleb opened the door to the men on the porch. The taller one stepped forward, removing his hat. "Mr. Ryder, my name's John Whitmore, county deputy. This here's Mr. Reeves from the Child Welfare Office." Reeves, the man with the folder, nodded curtly. "We're here on account of a report made concerning the minors in your care." Caleb's voice was flat. "They're not minors to me. They're my children. By affection, perhaps," Reeves said, "but not by law. None bear your name or your bloodline." According to statute, Evelyn stepped forward. "Statute doesn't raise a child, sir. It doesn't feed them, or teach them to read, or keep them safe through the night." Whitmore turned to her. "And you are Evelyn Shaw," she said, "teacher, caretaker, and witness to what happens in this home every single day." Reeves gave her a tight smile that held no warmth. "Miss Shaw, we appreciate your concern, but the matter's not personal, it's procedure. Unless legal guardianship is verified, the children must be placed in county custody." The words hung heavy in the air. Behind the half-open door, Evelyn could hear Rosie start to cry. Caleb's voice hardened. "You'll take them over my dead body." "Let's not make trouble," Whitmore said quietly. "We're just following orders." Evelyn's heart pounded. And if the community speaks for him? If the church, the neighbors, everyone who's seen how he lives, if they all stand behind him? Reeves blinked, caught off guard. "That's not I've already sent letters," she continued. "Testimonies, written and signed. Reverend Harlan's statement will reach the county by noon." Whitmore looked uncertain now, but Reeves' expression soured. "Even so, until those papers arrive." "You can wait," Caleb said. His tone left no room for argument. The standoff stretched. Outside, the wind rattled the porch railing. Finally, Whitmore spoke again, softer this time. "We'll stay in Clearwater 2 nights. I'll give it until Friday. But if there's no authorization by then—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Reeves gave a short nod, turned on his heel, and walked back toward the wagon. Caleb closed the door and leaned against it, shoulders sagging. Evelyn exhaled shakily, only now realizing she'd been holding her breath. "That was close," she whispered. "Too close," he said. "But you bought us time." They stood there in silence, the sound of rain starting again outside, light and steady. Then Evelyn reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "We'll make them see. Caleb, they have to." He looked down at her hand, then at her face. "I ain't used to anyone standing beside me in a fight." "Then get used to it," she said gently. That night, the house was quiet again, but not peaceful. The children clung to each other, frightened by what they'd heard. Evelyn stayed awake long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring into the dying fire. She thought about all the places she'd been, all the lives she'd tried to rebuild, and realized this one mattered most. For once, she wasn't just surviving. She was protecting something worth keeping. Outside. Caleb sat on the porch steps, hat in his hands, eyes fixed on the dark hills. When Evelyn joined him, he didn't turn. "They'll come back," he said. "I know. Even if we win this round, there'll be another. Then we'll keep fighting." He looked at her then. Really looked. as if seeing her not as the woman who had arrived months ago with dust on her shoes and sorrow in her eyes, but as something more, someone rooted here, the way sage took hold of even the hardest soil. "Ah, you ever get tired of starting over?" he asked quietly. "Every day," she said, "but I never stop, because one day you stop starting and you realize you've arrived." He nodded, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. Maybe that day's here. The wind picked up again, cold but clean. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder, just for a moment, and he didn't pull away. Somewhere in the house behind them, Tala stirred and murmured in her sleep. Safe for now. And out beyond the porch, the land waited wide, patient and untamed, like the hearts of those who called it home. The next day dawned bright and deceptively calm. The storm had swept the valley clean, leaving the air sharp and clear, the kind of morning that made the world seem gentle again. But beneath that peace, tension clung to Sage Hollow like a shadow that refused to leave. Evelyn was already outside by sunrise, hanging the washed linens along the fence. Each movement was deliberate, her mind turning over the words the deputy had left behind until Friday. 2 days. That was all they had to prove what love meant in a place where rules didn't see hearts. Caleb came from the barn, carrying a bucket of feed. His steps were slower than usual, heavy with thought. He looked at her, then at the white sheets fluttering in the wind. "You slept any barely," she said. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that wagon again." He nodded grimly. "They'll be waiting in Clearwater by now. I should ride in today, see if the Reverend's letter got there." "You can't go alone," she said immediately. "I've been doing things alone a long time." "Eve," she folded her arms, meeting his gaze. "Not any more." He hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. "All right. We'll both go." By mid-morning, they were riding toward town. Micah was left in charge of the house, though he stood tall and solemn, as though he carried the weight of a man twice his age. "I'll keep Rosie and Tala safe," he promised. Evelyn ruffled his hair gently. "I know you will." The road stretched long and quiet, their horses' hooves thudding against damp earth. Around them, the landscape glowed with new life creeks running full, wildflowers pushing through mud. But neither of them spoke for miles. Caleb's hand occasionally drifted to his hat, fidgeting, while Evelyn's thoughts circled the same question over and over. What if it wasn't enough? When they reached Clearwater, the small town buzzed with its usual rhythm, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the chatter of merchants setting up stalls, the faint smell of baked bread from the general store. Yet when they tied their horses outside the post office, Evelyn felt eyes on them. People whispered. Word traveled fast in small places. Reverend Harlan met them at the church steps, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I've sent every letter I promised," he said before Caleb even asked. "Half the town signed petitions for you. Caleb, even Mrs. Lantry, and she doesn't sign anything unless it's about pie competitions, despite the gravity of it all." Evelyn almost smiled. "Thank you, Reverend." He nodded. "But I won't lie to you. Reeves is a stubborn man. He's got friends in the county office, and he's set on making an example of this. Said it's about law and order." Caleb's jaw tensed. "Law and order don't mean a damn thing when it's used to take kids from their home." The Reverend sighed, eyes soft with pity. "I know. That's why I sent a copy to the governor's clerk, too. Maybe it'll reach the right hands in time." After leaving the church, they walked the short dirt road to the telegraph office. Inside, the operator, a wiry man with a handlebar mustache, looked up. Message came through an hour ago for a Mr. Caleb Ryder. Caleb stepped forward, heart pounding. The man handed him a folded note stamped with the county seal. Evelyn held her breath as he opened it. He read it once, then again. His shoulders eased slightly. "They've delayed the hearing," he said, voice low but steady. "The governor's clerk requested a review." Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That buys us time." "Maybe more than that," he said, eyes lifting to meet hers. "It means someone's listening." They left the office into the golden light of late morning. For the first time in days, Evelyn felt the heaviness inside her chest lift just a little. Caleb walked beside her, quiet as always, but there was something in his stride, a steadiness that felt like hope. On their way back, they stopped by the river crossing. The storm had swollen it wide, muddy water swirling around broken timbers. Caleb dismounted, crouching to study the damage. "Gonna take a week to rebuild that bridge," he muttered. Evelyn stood beside him, watching the water rush by. "Seems like everything here breaks before it heals." He looked at her then, sunlight glinting off his eyes. "That's the thing about this land. It teaches you to build again." She smiled faintly. "And what about hearts?" He paused, then said softly, "Same rule applies." They rode home under a soft wind. By the time they reached Sage Hollow, the children were waiting by the fence. Micah ran forward first, face bright. "You're back. Rosie made lunch. It's awful, but she said we had to wait." Rosie scowled, hands on hips. "You said it was fine when you ate it." Caleb laughed a low, genuine sound that startled even himself. "That's the best news I've heard all day." Inside, the house smelled of burnt bread and something sweet. Evelyn helped set the table, pretending not to notice Caleb stealing glances at her from across the room. When they finally sat down to eat, it wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. Every bite tasted like safety, like a victory too small to name, but too real to ignore. After lunch, Caleb stepped outside to fix the fence while the children chased each other across the yard. Evelyn followed with a jug of water. "You really think they'll wait now?" she asked. He wiped sweat from his brow. "Maybe, maybe not. But it don't change what we do next. What's that we keep living? Let them come and see what family looks like when it's built out of more than blood." Her chest tightened. "You sound almost sure." He looked up at her, eyes soft. "Maybe I'm starting to be." That evening, as the sun dipped low, Evelyn sat with the children on the porch. Tala leaned against her arm, sleepy and warm. Rosie hummed a tune while Micah whittled a stick into the shape of a bird. Caleb joined them, lowering himself onto the step beside Evelyn. "Remember when you said storms pass quick?" she asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "Didn't say they don't leave mud behind." She chuckled softly. "Then I guess we'll just have to keep cleaning up together." He turned toward her, his voice low and sincere. "I reckon I'd like that." The children's laughter echoed into the twilight. For a moment, everything felt suspended. The fear, the law, the weight of what might come tomorrow. All that existed was this porch, this small family, and the sound of the land breathing around them. And as the stars began to bloom over Sage Hollow, Evelyn realized something quietly certain, no matter what the county decided. She wasn't leaving this place. Not the man who'd taught her courage by silence, nor the children who'd given her reason to believe again. Whatever came next, she'd face it here with them. The next morning dawned with a strange stillness. No wind, no birds. Even the cattle in the lower field were silent, as though the land itself was waiting. Evelyn woke early, her instincts humming with unease. Friday had come. She dressed quietly, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders, and looked out the window. The horizon was streaked with soft gold, the kind of beauty that made you forget trouble for a heartbeat. But she couldn't. The memory of the deputy's warning echoed in her chest. Today they would return, downstairs. Caleb was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold. His hat rested beside him, his revolver holstered at his hip. Not out of threat, just habit. His face was calm, but the calm of a man bracing for something heavy. Evelyn poured herself a cup and sat across from him. "You think they'll come early?" He nodded once. "If they aim to take something, they'll want to get it done before noon." She studied him for a long moment. "And if the letters reached them, then maybe this'll go different," he said. "But I don't count on luck much." "Then count on me," she said softly. He looked at her then, eyes steady and dark. "I am." Outside, the children were helping feed the horses, unaware of what hung over the day. Evelyn watched them from the window, Micah careful and serious, Rosie humming to herself, Tala clutching her small wooden horse. The sight made her throat tighten. She whispered a prayer that today wouldn't take them apart. By mid-morning, the sound of wagon wheels echoed down the road. Caleb stood, his chair scraping back. Evelyn followed him to the porch. The same wagon appeared, dust trailing behind it. Deputy Whitmore drove, with Mr. Reeves seated stiff beside him. Behind them, another man rode horseback, wearing a black coat and carrying a folder thicker than before. When they stopped at the gate, Reeves was the first to climb down. "Mr. Ryder," he called. "We've reviewed the case. The county office has rendered a decision." Caleb's shoulders squared. "Let's hear it." Reeves unfolded a sheet of paper. His voice was clipped and dry. Given the lack of documented guardianship and an absence of formal adoption proceedings, the county has determined the minor shall be relocated to Clearwater for reassignment. Evelyn's hand clenched around the railing. "No," she said sharply. "You can't. They're his family." Reeves ignored her. "You have until sundown to prepare them. The transfer will occur before dark." Whitmore shifted uneasily, glancing between them. He looked almost ashamed. "Caleb," he began softly, "maybe there's another way." "There's always another way," Evelyn cut in, stepping forward. "If you just listen—" Reeves frowned. "Miss Shaw, I suggest you let the man speak for himself." "I'm speaking for all of them," she said, voice trembling but fierce. "I sent letters, affidavits, signed testimonies from half this town. You can't tell me you haven't seen them." The man in the black coat, the clerk, cleared his throat. "I received those documents this morning," he said, his tone more even. "The governor's office has reviewed them as well." Reeves turned sharply, and the clerk hesitated, glancing at Evelyn, then at Caleb. "The review found no legal misconduct in Mr. Ryder's care. In fact, the letters commend the household for exemplary guardianship under difficult conditions." Reeves's face paled. "That's irrelevant. The law, the clerk interrupted firmly, also allows discretion in extraordinary cases, and this one qualifies, effective immediately. Mr. Ryder is granted temporary custodial rights, pending formal adoption review." Evelyn felt her breath catch. "You mean they stay?" The clerk nodded. "They stay." Reeves's jaw tightened. "This is irregular." "So is compassion," the clerk replied evenly. Caleb exhaled, slow and deep, like a man who'd been holding his breath for years. Whitmore gave him a small, knowing nod. Reeves muttered under his breath, slammed his folder shut, and climbed back onto the wagon. As they rode away, dust rising behind them, Evelyn turned to Caleb. His hands were still trembling slightly, though his face remained composed. "It's done," she whispered. He nodded. "For now." Tears pricked at her eyes. "No, Caleb, it's more than that. You won." He looked at her with quiet wonder. "We won," he corrected. The children came running moments later, their laughter breaking through the heavy silence. Rosie reached him first, arms flung around his waist. "They're not taking us." "Not today, darling," Caleb said, lifting her up. "Not ever, if I can help it." Micah stood beside him, trying to hide his tears, but failing. Even Tala, still weak from her fever, smiled faintly and reached for Evelyn's hand. "We stay home." Evelyn knelt beside her, her voice soft but firm. "Yes, sweetheart, we stay home." The rest of the day passed in a strange, quiet relief. The air felt lighter, the colors brighter. Neighbors began arriving by afternoon first, the Reverend, then Mrs. Lantry with a pie, then others from Clearwater, each bringing something small as if to mark the victory. Caleb stood among them, awkward but grateful, shaking hands and saying little. Evelyn moved through the crowd like a calm flame, thanking each person with that warm steadiness that had drawn everyone to her since the first day she arrived. As the sun began to set, the last of the guests departed. The children fell asleep in a heap by the fire, worn out from the excitement. The house glowed in the golden haze of twilight. Evelyn and Caleb stood on the porch again, side by side, watching the horizon burn to red. "You ever think it'd end like this?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Didn't think it'd end at all. Most things I've cared for didn't last long enough." She turned toward him. "Maybe that's why this one did." He looked at her then, eyes reflecting the dying light. "You could have left. Eve. When it got hard. When the law came down. But you stayed." "I stayed because this place matters," she said. "Because they matter. And," her voice softened, "because you do too." He didn't speak, just reached out, hesitant, and brushed his hand against hers. It wasn't a grand gesture, but something quiet and whole, the kind of touch that said more than words ever could. The last light slipped below the ridge. Crickets began their slow song, and the ranch settled into stillness again. Evelyn leaned against the railing, breathing in the scent of rain-soaked earth and horses and wood smoke. It smelled like home. And as the first stars blinked awake over Sage Hollow, she thought of everything they had endured: the storms, the loss, the law, the fear, and knew with certainty that it had all led here, to this porch, to these people, to a kind of peace she hadn't believed in for years. "Inside," Tala murmured in her sleep. Rosie laughed faintly through a dream. Micah snored softly near the hearth. Caleb turned toward the sound, smiling with a gentleness that could break a heart. "Guess the house finally feels full," he said. Evelyn nodded. "It's been full all along. We just had to see it." The days that followed felt like borrowed grace. After the storm, after the verdict, after the fear that had lived in every heartbeat, life at Sage Hollow began to breathe again. The children's laughter returned first, bright and unguarded, spilling across the yard like sunlight. Then came the rhythm of chores and the soft murmur of evening prayers, the steady heartbeat of a home that refused to break. Evelyn found herself smiling more easily now. She woke before dawn each day, not out of worry, but habit lighting the stove, brewing coffee, humming an old tune from her childhood. Caleb would join her soon after, his boots heavy on the wooden steps, his hair still damp from washing at the pump. They moved around each other in a comfortable quiet, speaking little but understanding much. One morning, as she stirred a pot of oats, he leaned against the doorway, watching her. "House feels different," he said. She glanced up. "Different how? Like it's breathing again?" he said simply. She smiled. "Maybe it finally knows it's safe." He nodded. "Maybe we all do." There was a stillness between them then, not the silence of distance, but of recognition. He wanted to say more. She could feel it, but the words hovered just out of reach. And maybe that was all right. Some feelings didn't need to be spoken to be heard. Later that day, Evelyn took the children to the hill beyond the barn, where wildflowers had begun to bloom again. They brought a chalkboard and bits of chalk, writing letters and drawing shapes beneath the open sky. Rosie spelled her name in big, uneven letters. Tala drew a crooked horse with a sun above it. Micah wrote one word carefully in the center of the board home. Evelyn watched him, her chest tightening. "That's a good word," she said softly. He looked at her, his expression serious. "We didn't have one before." "Not really." She crouched beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Now you do." The wind carried the sound of hoofbeats from the pasture. Caleb was riding back from the northern field, reins loose, his hat tipped low. Evelyn watched him approach, sunlight flashing off the buckle at his belt, his figure framed by the wide blue sky. He looked every bit the part of the man he was roughened by life, but unbroken by it. When he dismounted, the children ran to him. Tala lifted her arms. Up she cried. He laughed and swung her onto his hip, dust rising around his boots. "Good day for lessons?" he asked Evelyn. "The best kind," she said, smiling. "The kind that doesn't feel like learning." He grinned faintly. "That's the only kind worth teaching." As the sun sank lower, they all walked back toward the house together. Evelyn's skirts brushed the grass. Caleb's hand brushed hers just once, lightly, like an accident, but neither pulled away. That night, after supper, when the children were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Evelyn stood on the porch. The moon was bright, the land silvered and still. Caleb joined her, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to her without a word. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "Too quiet. Makes a man think too much. About what he took a slow sip. About how fast things change. About what stays." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "And what's stayin'?" "Caleb." He was silent for a long moment, eyes fixed on the fields. Then he turned to her, voice low and steady. "You. Them kids. This place. That's what's stayin'. If you'll have it." Her breath caught. "What do you mean, I mean?" he said, setting his cup down on the railing. "I've spent half my life watching things fall apart. Lost my folks. Lost friends. Thought I'd lost myself for a while, too. But this ranch, you, somehow put me back together." Evelyn's eyes shimmered. "Caleb." He stepped closer. "I ain't a man of fancy words. Eve. I can't promise you much, just a roof that leaks sometimes, a fire that burns low, and a heart that won't quit on you." Her voice trembled when she spoke. "That's more than enough." He reached for her hand. "You once said you couldn't have children." She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his. He smiled softly. "Good. I reckon I've got enough kids for both." The words, the same ones that had first bound their paths together, landed now with new weight, no longer a jest, but a vow. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. She laughed through them, shaking her head. "You still know how to turn a phrase? Cowboy?" He chuckled low. "Didn't know it'd stick with you all this time." "It did," she whispered, "because no one ever said it like you meant it." The wind swept gently across the porch, carrying the faint sound of crickets. Evelyn felt something loosen inside her, a quiet surrender she hadn't known she needed. The loneliness she had worn for so long, the grief she'd carried like a second skin, began to ease. Caleb's hand came to rest lightly against her cheek, rough thumb brushing away a tear. "Eve," he said softly, "I don't know what tomorrow's got in store, but whatever it is, I want you here beside me." Her heart fluttered, but her answer came easily, like breathing. "I'm not going anywhere. Caleb Ryder." He smiled, then small, real, the kind that reached his eyes, the kind that had been waiting years to surface. And as he leaned in, their foreheads touched first. A gentle promise before the rest followed a kiss that felt like the closing of a long open wound. When they parted, neither spoke. The world around them was still, the kind of stillness that only comes after truth. The moon shone high over the valley, bathing the porch in silver light. Inside, the house creaked softly, alive and peaceful. Evelyn exhaled, her voice a whisper. "You know, I think I finally understand this place." Caleb raised a brow. "Yeah, it's not just the land," she said. "It's the people. It's what you build when you decide to stay." He nodded, his gaze warm. "Guess we're staying then. Guess we are." They stood there a while longer, side by side, the future wide and open before them. Somewhere out in the pasture, a horse whinnied, and the sound rolled softly through the night. Evelyn closed her eyes, listening, her heart full. In that moment, Sage Hollow was no longer just a ranch. It was a promise, a second chance carved out of dust and faith, held together by hands that refused to let go. Spring came early that year. The last of the snow melted into the creek, carrying with it the memory of storms long past. The air was rich with the scent of pine and wild lilac, and the hills that framed Sage Hollow glowed the soft green of rebirth. Evelyn often said that the land had learned to breathe again. Caleb just smiled and told her it had taken a woman's touch to remind it how. The ranch bustled with quiet life. The children rose early each morning, racing out the door before breakfast to feed the chickens or chase after the lambs. Tala, now strong again, had a habit of sneaking into the barn to nap on the haystack beside the new foal. Rosie had taken to helping Evelyn in the kitchen, insisting she could cook better than her teacher, though the occasional burned biscuits still said otherwise. Micah, serious and steady, worked alongside Caleb in the pastures, his small hands gripping the reins like he'd been born to it. Evelyn stood on the porch most mornings, coffee cup in hand, watching them all. There was a rhythm now, one she never wanted to end, a gentle, ordinary kind of happiness that felt like healing. Sometimes she caught herself holding her breath, half afraid it would disappear if she believed in it too much. But it didn't. It stayed, just like they had. That afternoon, the valley was alive with color. Neighbors from Clearwater had come to help repair the corral fence that winter had splintered. Mrs. Lantry brought 2 pies. Reverend Harlan arrived with a crate of nails and a smile. Laughter carried through the air, hammer strikes blending with the sound of horses and chatter. Caleb was at the center of it all. Sleeves rolled, sawdust clinging to his arms. Evelyn watched him from the shade of the oak, the way he moved with quiet certainty, as though the world finally fit around him. He caught her gaze once and tipped his hat with that small, knowing grin that always made her heart trip. By evening, the fence stood straight again. Strong and proud, the workers lingered for supper stew, cornbread, and Mrs. Lantry's pie, and as the lanterns were lit, someone pulled out a fiddle. Before long, music filled the yard, wild and sweet. Rosie danced barefoot in the grass. Tala clapped her hands. Even Micah, pretending to be too grown up for such things, couldn't stop smiling. Caleb turned to Evelyn, eyes glinting in the firelight. "You dance, Miss Shaw?" She laughed softly. "Not since I was young enough to forget who was watching." "Well," he said, holding out a calloused hand, "there's only the stars to see us now." She hesitated, but when she placed her hand in his, the rest of the world fell away. The fiddle sang, the night hummed, and they moved together under the open sky, slow, easy, like the land itself had found its rhythm in them. For a moment, there was no past, no fear, no loneliness, only the steady beat of two hearts that had learned to stay. When the music faded and the guests began to leave, Evelyn and Caleb remained by the dying fire. The children slept curled under a blanket near the steps. Above them, the stars burned bright, scattered like silver dust. Evelyn tilted her head back to look at them. "You ever think," she said softly, "how far we've come from the day I first walked up that road?" He nodded. "You looked scared. Back then. I was—" And now she smiled, eyes shining. "Now I'm home." He reached out and took her hand again. "You made it one, Eve." She looked at him, her voice low. "No, Caleb, you did. You and those children you saved me before I even knew I needed saving." He fell quiet, his thumb tracing small circles over her knuckles. "Funny thing," he said at last. "I thought I was the one doing the savin'." They both laughed softly, the sound gentle as the wind. Somewhere beyond the ridge, an owl called. The night stretched wide and endless, wrapping around them like a promise. Weeks turned to months, and Sage Hollow settled into its new peace. Evelyn began teaching other children from the valley, setting up a small classroom under the oak tree. Mothers from town brought their little ones every Tuesday, trading baskets of eggs or hand-sewn linens as payment. Sometimes Caleb joined in, pretending to fix something nearby while secretly watching her teach, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. One evening, after the last of the students had gone, Evelyn sat alone beneath the tree, brushing chalk dust from her skirt. Caleb walked up quietly and handed her a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked. He shrugged. "Just something I've been working on." Inside was a handmade journal bound in leather, the pages blank and clean. Embossed on the front were the words for the lessons yet to come. Evelyn blinked, caught between laughter and tears. "Caleb, it's beautiful." He scratched the back of his neck, suddenly shy. "Figure you might want to write down some of what you do here, for when they're grown, for when I'm not around to remind 'em." Her throat tightened. "Don't talk like that." He smiled faintly. "Just thinking ahead. A man's got to make sure what he builds don't vanish when he's gone." She closed the book gently, holding it to her chest. "Nothing you've built here will vanish." He met her eyes, then steady, warm, full of that quiet truth that had always anchored her. "Maybe not. Not with you here. That night." Evelyn opened the journal by the lamplight. On the first page, she wrote, "This is the story of a man who thought he was too broken to love, and a woman who thought she'd forgotten how. But love found them anyway in dust, in work, in laughter, in small hands that called them home. Years later, she would tell that story to Tala, Rosie, and Micah when they were grown. They would sit on the porch with their own children, listening to the wind carry echoes of the past through the valley. The ranch would still stand, its fences strong, its fields gold with grain, the oak tree spreading its shade wider each year. And if anyone ever asked how Sage Hollow came to be, they would answer simply, it began with a cowboy, a teacher, and a promise that family doesn't need blood, it just needs people who stay. As the final light of day faded beyond the hills, Evelyn looked out at the horizon, where the sky melted into amber and rose. Caleb came to stand beside her, his arms slipping easily around her shoulders. The children's laughter floated from the yard. "This," she said quietly, "this is everything I never dared to dream." He kissed her temple, his voice a low murmur. "Then I reckon we did all right." The wind rustled the grass. The porch creaked beneath their feet, and the stars began to rise steady, endless, familiar. For once, Evelyn didn't wonder what tomorrow might bring. She didn't need to. She already had what she'd spent her whole life searching for. Home. And a heart that stayed. She said, "I can't have children." The cowboy smiled. "Good. I've got enough kids for both." It is more than a love story. It's a quiet reminder that broken things can still be made whole. Evelyn and Caleb's journey shows us that family is not just about shared bloodlines, but about shared hearts, about the people who choose to stay when life gets hard. It's about compassion, about building something steady and true in a world that often forgets what real connection means. Through their story, we see that healing doesn't come from forgetting the past, but from facing it together. Love doesn't demand perfection. It asks for courage, patience, and faith that even the smallest moments a hand held, a porch light left on, can change everything. This story speaks to anyone who's ever lost hope, who's ever thought their chance at love was gone. It tells us that it's never too late to begin again, never too late to find home, never too late to be loved for who you are. So tonight, as you listen to their story, let it remind you life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Love often arrives quietly in kindness, in loyalty, in second chances. Thank you for being part of this journey. If their story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, because somewhere out there, someone still needs to believe that love like this is real.